major escalation of the White House's targeting of Minnesota officials today. Federal prosecutors served grand jury subpoenas to Governor Walz and 5 other Twin Cities leaders as part of the DOJ's investigation into whether they obstructed the massive immigration operation in the Twin Cities. Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minneapolis and St. Paul's mayors received subpoenas along with the Ramsey and Hennepin County attorneys. They have spoken out against ICE's growing presence in Minnesota after the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer and continued tensions since. The subpoenas, which seek state records, come as the Trump administration urged a judge to reject a lawsuit Ellison filed calling for an end to Operation Metro Surge. Now today, Walz called that Justice Department investigation a partisan distraction. In a statement, the Democrat wrote that the federal government's energy should instead be directed toward restoring trust, accountability, and real law and order, not political retaliation. Walz also called on the president to visit Minnesota and see how people from all walks of life are working together despite the recent unrest.